Well, hello from the Aviva Stadium. Well, after a troubling first half for Ireland, they recovered to beat Japan 41 points to 10. They scored 6 tries overall. Rory O'Connor and Cian Tracy are here with me. Welcome, lads.
Hi.
So a reminder that our rugby coverage on Indosport is sponsored by Energia, who sponsor rugby at all levels in Ireland. Energia's Rugby for All initiative supports inclusion and welcomes people of all abilities to participate. To learn more about the rugby partnerships, go to energia.ie/rugby. Well, Rory, what do you make of that?
Yeah, it wasn't very impressive, was it, from Ireland? I think it got better as it went along, but Andy Farrell was asked, his first question in the press conference was, did you get the response you needed after the defeat to New Zealand? And he said, in short, no.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was happy with it. I don't think he should be happy with it. You think back 4 years to when Japan came to Dublin, at the exact same point of the World Cup cycle, and what was the first game of the window. Now, it was a stronger Ireland team. It was completely first choice, but they played as if Japan weren't there. They just played their own game. They ran in try after try. It was incredibly impressive, and it was the launch pad for the rest of the World Cup cycle. Whereas today, now maybe Japan have made huge strides under Eddie Jones and are a better team than they were then, but Japan were definitely a factor in this game, and Japan at times were the better team, even though they couldn't get scores on the board, and Ireland defended quite well in the face of a very impressive and slick Japanese attack. But when Ireland are looking at where they are in the world and where the game is going, and we're looking at the two best teams in the world probably going up against each other tonight in Paris, they're so far off that level at this stage, and there was nothing today apart from a few little bits that would really give you any faith or confidence to predict they're about to bounce back.
Yeah, that's what we spoke about this yesterday, Cian. That's what we were looking for.
Yeah, like 6 tries to 1, if you're looking at it at that, you should be sort of pleased, but it doesn't tell the full story at all. Neither does the full-time score, and I think there was an inevitability about Ireland pulling away at the end, which they did. I think Japan just completely ran out of steam, but I was really impressed with them as well.
Yeah.
I know they weren't quite on the 2019 level at the World Cup, but some of their attack, I mean, they look like they're really building nicely again, which I don't think a lot of people maybe had seen coming. We don't get to see, obviously, a whole pile of them, but they were very impressive, and the contrast of their slick passing, like you said, Rod, and the lines of running that they were running compared to
really showed up Ireland, didn't
compared
it?
to like what Ireland were doing with more possession, more territory, was, I would say, very concerning. I think a lot of the same errors, I mean, if we're almost having the same conversation that we had after the Chicago game last weekend, just keep cropping up, and their habit of compounding errors just keeps creeping in. Like there were some good moments. I thought Jack Crowley's try was pretty good. The bench made a big impact, but I think the impact of the bench and Ireland running in late tries is caveated by the fact that Japan were out on their feet by then, so I don't think we should be getting, or anyone should be getting too far ahead of themselves in that regard. Yeah,
and Farrell mentioned at the end as well, I worried just about those missed opportunities. There was the forward passes, that moment, like a few minutes even into the second half, I think it was James Ryan just inexplicably dropped the ball. Just so frustrating.
I mean, Nick Timoney's try came from an error. 2 of the tries came from errors. Certainly, maybe the second one I'm thinking of is the Jacob Stockdale disallowed one, but you're talking about, not constructive play, that you're kind of making the most. Timoney did brilliantly to run that try in, and he played quite well on his kind of return to international rugby, but in total, this doesn't look like a team anywhere near what it was. We know what good looks like under this coaching ticket for this team, and that wasn't it. It came in flashes. There were periods where they saw the space and they went to the space, but the quality of their passing or the quality of their kicking wasn't good enough. There was a little bit of bad luck involved the odd time they got up for a contestable and it just wouldn't quite go their way, but you're kind of relying on 50-50s, and just there seems to be a lack of confidence, a lack of flow, but also mental errors around the line out that I think will, at this stage, at this level, shouldn't be happening for a team that's ranked 3rd in the world, at least until tonight. They should be far better than what we saw today. Fair enough, New Zealand have one of the best defensive lineouts in the game, but Japan don't. They have a good line out, but you should be able to run your line out at 95, 96% against Japan, and they weren't anywhere near that. Now the numbers aren't terrible, but it was more the life that it sucks out of the Aviva Stadium every time one of those lineouts goes astray. The whole crowd is looking at it, waiting for it to happen.
It was as early as the 3rd minute. That's when Ireland lost the first try, and the groan.
I was just going to say it was the exact same as last weekend in Soldier Field, where just a complete malfunction. And you could see Ronan Kelleher, who was obviously the hooker today, pointing to his head, his ear. I mean, I asked Andy Farrell just now in the press conference afterwards, and he said he's not worried, but he's bothered, I think was the way he put it. And look, he came out in staunch defence of Paul O'Connell and his players. And look, there's no doubt that they're putting in the hours of work behind the scenes, but whatever they're doing isn't working, because I think you hit the nail on the head, Rod. This isn't in New Zealand, this isn't a South African line-out defence. Now, Japan deserve credit in that regard, but I think Joe Schmidt will be licking his lips at the prospect of coming here next weekend, and Rassie Erasmus certainly will be when you look at the line-out jumpers that they have. And you're both right in the point that you made. It sucks the life out of everything. It sucks the life. Obviously, it was a 12:40 kickoff, a really flat occasion, as we
really
expected.
Flat,
but
yeah.
Ireland didn't give the crowd enough to get involved in the game for that early kickoff. And I'd imagine that would have been something they spoke about all week. Give the crowd something to get into early on, and they just didn't do that. It was, like I said, repeat errors that we're seeing. That means that, in my mind, it's a worrying recurrence now.
Yeah, it's gone on for too long at this stage, and when you have Paul O'Connell running it with the aid of John Fogarty, who was an excellent hooker in his own career, and then you have a Lions hooker with 2 lines forwards to aim for, plus Ryan Baird, who's an exceptional line out forward. Although now I can't definitively blame the switch offs on Ryan Baird, but often what you hear about Ryan Baird is that he does switch off in those moments, and certainly there was one where he turned to lift James Ryan, who was going to lift him, and neither of them got off the ground, and it's a real farcical moment. And I guess we look at the two of those, we know that James Ryan is far more experienced in this zone, so maybe it's unfair to blame Ryan Baird for that, because I don't know for sure, but certainly when Keller is pointing at his head, he's telling players to switch on and listen to the calls, because it's not as if they're being drowned out by a cauldron of noise here, which they might be next Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or certainly for the Springboks game in 2 weeks' time when they're going up against one of the best lineouts in the world.
That's a bit of an indictment, though, Rory, isn't it, that he's to say that to his players?
Well, it happened last week as well with the first line out of the game. So it's at this level you cannot switch off. It's as simple as that. It's if you want to be one of the top teams in the world, which Ireland still are on paper, but are not by performance, you got to cut that out quickly. And if you want to be a key part of this forward pack, which Baird looks like he's going to be, because he is he brings so much to the game, and his carrying game was excellent today, and his athleticism in the line out. But you got to nail that part of your game, and they all do, because I don't think James Ryan and Tyburn played well in any facet of the game, because maybe the line out seeps into it, but they were the ones dropping balls. Neither of them look confident. Yes, there is a jet lag. You can't take that out of the equation. They did fly back last weekend. It does have an effect, and both of those players started next week. Tyburn wasn't on the pitch very long, but he was involved all week. But I'm not just blaming Ryan Baird. I think there was switch offs across the board. There was lapses across the board, and it just wasn't a terribly good performance.
Can you imagine the amount of focus, just like last week in the build-up, that they would have put on getting the first line out right? Yeah. I mean, just secure your own ball, and it completely malfunctions across the board, and that spreads panic, I think, throughout the team. Like I said, it doesn't give the crowd anything to get in by. Ireland's attack stutters off the back of it, and to be fair, it did improve when Gus McCarthy came on.
Well, we saw how well it, for both of the McCarthy's tries,
and like that's how important it is. And you see, like, even I go back to the Japan try. I mean, the side of Japan mauling Ireland over the line, which is obviously connected to the line out. And what was sort of alarming to me about that was, and I said it to you, Rod, at the time, was it was so similar to what happened in Soldier Field for Tamati Williams' try, if people remember. So last week, Ireland went up to contest the line out, and Ryan Baird conceded a penalty for jumping across against New Zealand. New Zealand, rather than putting it back into the corner, ran the 5 metre tap, if people remember, and Cody Taylor popped it off to Tamati Williams, scored a try. The try here tonight, James Ryan was penalised for taking the man in the air at the line out. Now, instead of Japan running a 5 metre tap, they put it back into the corner, which to me sort of spoke volumes for a Japan team, thinking, well, we actually can get the edge, and they absolutely demolished them over the line. Now, I know Ireland got one back in the second half, but even the side of Jack Crowley taking 3 points after 5 minutes, I mean, look, I understand the logic of it, and I am, generally speaking, one for take your points while they're on offer, but a home game against Japan, to me, it just spoke to a nervousness that's in the group, and we saw that permeate across the course of what was to come, because when they went 17-0 up, I think going in at half-time 17-10 was a far better reflection in terms of the balance of play that Japan deserved.
Anything else of a major worry for you, Rory, from that first half? in particular, I suppose.
Well,
what else?
The handling.
We're not finished yet.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like a well-coached team at the moment. It doesn't look like a team that's believes in what it's doing. It doesn't look like a team that has confidence. And that's the first time in the Andy Farrell era you can say that. I'm not saying he's a bad coach. He's done brilliant things with this Ireland team, but he needs to find a way of getting his message through again, because at the moment apparently they're training brilliantly out in Abbottstown. Apparently everything's clicking in training, but they're not being able to deliver. It's a little bit like 2020, and maybe it's all going to happen a little bit later in this World Cup cycle, but I didn't see that turnaround coming in 2020. 2021 when it went that England game that led into the revival. But if you look at the team that played Japan 4 years ago, and you look at the team that's going to go out and play against Australia next week, it's pretty much the same. So take Sexton out of it, it's pretty much going to be the same body. So you're asking the same players to because he's not. I think even though there was a couple of changes today, I can't see many of them being involved next weekend. So he's looking for the same hitters to come out and play the hits and do the same things to get back to the level that they were at before, rather than finding, apart from say Tommy O'Brien, obviously the out half issue. They brought through new out halves, but that's not by choice. That's by need. So we're looking at him trying to do the same things with the same people, and it's not working at the moment. It's clunky to use a phrase. He didn't use that phrase today, but he often does. And it's just going it's a very straight line. It's like they've hit a kind of a level, and they're at that level in a straight line at the moment, and it's not a very good level.
Can I ask you something, a good point that you make there in terms of the training? We hear this all the time. We heard it in the build up to Chicago as well, that they went over on the Tuesday, they were training the house down. At times I wonder, do they fall in love with themselves a little bit about their standard of their training? I mean,
is the training not too tough enough? Is that what you're saying?
Or
they're not calling each other up?
They had convinced themselves last week that what they did in training was going to be good enough for them to get up to test match standard against the All Blacks, and it clearly wasn't. So maybe I don't know obviously how they're training, we don't get to see it, but maybe they need to have a look at it and not rely so much on what they're doing at training, because if teams, with all due respect to Japan, are able to cause them that much problems, then it's a big issue for Ireland going forward. And I think to your point about players not taking their chance, and it was something that I asked Andy Farrell about as well. We mentioned it, Sinead, yesterday. This isn't the first time that Andy Farrell has made changes to a November team, a Six Nations team against Italy, and players have not taken...
And it's been so flat.
And that's the word he used, flat. He didn't quite go to the Andy Farrell bingo to clunky, but he used the word flat, which is damning, I think, on the players who are coming in, because I couldn't agree with you more. When the team for Australia gets named next Thursday, in my mind, it'll be back to the tried and trusted, and those who were left out only have themselves to blame because they didn't take their opportunities today. I thought guys were forcing it, trying too hard. Like Jacob Stockdale, I think, is a good example of that. Couldn't fault his endeavour by any means, but there were times where he gets the ball down the left wing and you're thinking, wow, he looks great here, and then throws a really loose offload, and you understand what he's doing. He's trying to catch the eye, but it's not the way to sort of build yourself into the game. And I think a lot of guys, when they reflect on it, will be really frustrated, but like I said, they only have themselves to blame.
Like playing fullback.
I can't see it,
but I do think even if Osborne hadn't picked up a very unfortunate injury, I'm increasingly unconvinced, to use a double negative, that he's a fullback. I just think they need to get him into the midfield and find a different alternative to Hugo Keenan at fullback. So next week's an opportunity for someone, whether it's Jimmy O'Brien who come in and looked pretty good today, but again, the bench was playing against a weakening the Japan team. Stockdale's an option. We may see Matt Hansen return to the fold as well, but we're going down the depth chart in a pretty pivotal area at a moment where fullback is one of the most important positions on the pitch, and against two teams who love their contestables. So it's going to be a big challenge for whoever. Just to bring listeners up to date, if they haven't heard, Osborne has dislocated his shoulder, they suspect, so he's out for the next 2 weeks at least. So they're going to have to find a solution there. Stockdale's a potential solution there, but none of them are established internationals of the level of Hugo Keenan. I think the team is missing Hugo Keenan at the moment. It's been kind of underplayed. He does give them a lot of confidence in what he does, but I still think that's an area that you need to find. I think Seven, I thought Nick Timoney did a good job today. Seven's a big issue at the moment, whether if Josh Van der Fleer goes down. We saw Caelan Doris finish the game for the last 25 minutes. I've come to the opinion in the last couple of days, and it was good to see it today, that there's something there, that Van der Fleer is maybe, is he on the wane? That's probably too harsh, but he's certainly, they're too reliant on him. And if you put Doris there, it allows you to pick Conan at 8, Baird at 6. You've got a big back 5. Doris has huge dynamism. He can do the poaching stuff. They've got Tyburn as well. That's something I'd like them to look at in the next couple of weeks. And I think where Andy Farrell is looking at this, and this is what I was writing about today, he's not looking externally for solutions. It's not like he sees players out there that he can bring in. Like, we can see that. He only picked Tom Farrell today because Gary Reynolds was injured, and he's never been in a squad before. It's not like he sees solutions in the provinces. I think he's going to look for solutions within. His squad. I'm not convinced it's going to be good enough, but I think that's the way he's going.
So if we're already talking about next week, Keane, going off even today, Jack Crowley or Sam Prendergast? Percy, how do you think they went?
I still feel like when we're analysing the out half debate, when your line out doesn't function and it's such a key part to your attack, I feel like it's harsh to judge no matter what out half is playing there. Now, that said, I was really excited to see how Casey and Crowley would go again against a Japanese team who are clearly inferior to the likes of the All Blacks, Australia and South Africa, and it didn't quite click. I think he's a guy probably fit into the Jacob Stockdale category of just forcing it maybe a little too much.
Crowley or Casey?
Both actually at times. I just thought it was infectious throughout it. And look, it's easier said than done. I understand that guys who are on the fringes really want to push it to try and catch their eye, but there's times where you just want them to slot in. You don't need to be a hero. Just perform your roles. And look, I didn't think Crowley had his best day. I thought he finished his try brilliantly. He orchestrated another try as well, which was brilliant and a rare time the attack fired. And I think in regards to Sam Prendergast, he did very well when he came on. But I would go back to my initial point that Japan were out on their feet when he came on. And look, that's not to take away some of the passing that he threw. It looked like the Sam Prendergast, from last year.
He looked more confident out there today.
But again, it's easier to be confident when the team have already been beaten up. So, we love the debate, but I don't know. Do you think?
I think it's Crowley's win, though. I think Crowley did enough.
I think
Crowley came in form. He's done really good things. He's done a couple of things that aren't good enough, but I don't think they're enough to get him out of the team. I don't think you can pick Sam Prendergast based on 25 minutes against Japan. But I thought there were signs there of why Andy Farrell rates him so highly, and why he will have a future in the number 10 jersey for Ireland. But it's not going. It can't be just you are the number 10 for the next 10 years. It's going to be like there's two very good players there. Like, people seem to think you have to pick one and stick with him forever. At the moment, Crowley is in form. There was a couple of kicks that just didn't go long enough. There was a couple of passes that didn't quite stick. But his defence was very good. When it did go right, it looked very slick. And you put Gibson Park alongside him next week. I thought Casey played quite well today, so it's not. I think there's two good options there. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure Caelan Blade did great when he came on, but I think the 1 and 2 at number 9 is good. And I think that change up of what Prendergast can give you in a game that's a competition. He was a bit panicked last week coming into the game. The game was getting away from Ireland quickly. It was like water.
Apples and oranges, isn't it, in terms of coming on at home against Japan?
The same today, though. That last week he was coming on in a really difficult position where it's so hard to impress. Today he comes on as Ireland are pulling away, and but it's also the value of that. How do you weigh the two things? So look, it's great that he's showing a bit of form. It's great that some of those passes are sticking. That he's thrown it out the back offload to Tommy O'Brien for his try. And like O'Brien, before we move on to next week, there were good things. Like Caelan Doris coming back and probably the outstanding player on the pitch. I think that he was probably a bit hard done by in the man of the match. Like, put him into any team with Dan Sheehan, and you've got two of the best forwards in the world. And like, I know people are selling Ireland stock at the moment. They do have very, very good players. And the age profile, while it's alarming in a couple of areas, those are two players right in the prime of their careers. Those two were Doris was very good. I thought Timoney did well. I mean, took a stride brilliantly. And the breakdown was good. The defence was good. The scrum was excellent, albeit Japan are no great shakes.
They lost one against the Head just after half time.
I wouldn't worry about that too much. They were very dominant in that area, and I think that's like you may always throw up one. Referees always throw up.
I know against the Head, though, against a team like Japan, I agree with you. They were dominant, but it's not something that this isn't a massive Japanese team. I even remarked to you that
Eddie Jones actually said afterwards that he thought he could get at Ireland today at the scrum, but the Irish scrum came at them differently today. Now I wouldn't know enough to know what he meant by that, and he didn't elaborate on it, but.
And Paddy McCarthy did well when he came on. I mean, look, I understand the logic in trying to play Andrew Porter back into a bit of form, but I thought it was crazy. Number one, that he started. I just didn't think there was a huge need to start him, and he ended up playing. Was it 65 minutes? Yeah. I think again. I mean, like, you've got a guy like Paddy McCarthy there, Jack Boyle, who's been so unlucky to just been bombed out of the squad after all that he did last season. So again, these are the kind of games that you want to see the likes of Paddy McCarthy, and I thought he did really well. I thought Tom Clarkson did well, had a lovely
Gus
break.
McCarthy, and even
Gus McCarthy,
Andy Farrell made sure to mention him afterwards. He did
so
quite well. That bench impact.
And there were positives, and Cian Prendergast put himself about when he came on, and I agree with you. I thought Nick Timoney.
More from Conan as well, I thought, when he came on.
That's what you want from your bench. But again, I'll go back to the point that Japan were out on their feet. But I agree with you. I thought Timoney was quite lively. I mean, that is his USP, the way he finished the try, wasn't it? Like, he's electric when he gets up and running. But I was a little bit surprised he was taken off so early, actually. I would have liked to have seen him getting another 10, 15 minutes.
I think they wanted to look at that back. Yeah. I know Baird went into the second row, but I think they wanted to look at that combination. I mean, if Baird keeps switching off, and I think that like when we asked Andy Farrell last week about Ryan Baird after the game, so you asked, we were expecting it was a fairly, like, you were looking for a nice answer about a player who seemed to all of us to have done well, but he was like, he was good in some elements, but he's not, there's a lot there that he has to work on, and he just stopped speaking. So I don't think they're overly impressed with his consistency of performance and going to sleep in moments, and I think that's somewhere where, say, someone like Cian Prendergast could potentially come into it, because they rate him very highly in terms of his ability, like his brother, to take on detail and follow the plan. I thought he was good. I don't know if he did enough to earn a start against Australia, but I always got the sense they might mix and match a little bit next week and go full against South Africa, because they do know that this window, they basically secured their top 6 status ahead of the World Cup draw in December. And you
wouldn't have known it from last week, because Andy Farrell seemed to be, that was...
He was going on about it.
I think he was worried about losing their position if they lost against a team like Japan. But a couple of people have gone to me saying the top 3 is an advantage, that it will fade. Okay. It's not. I've checked it out.
When they get to a semi-final, is it?
Something like, but there's no benefit from being top 3 or top 6.
That was a cheap gag.
But like, there's no benefit from being top 6. So they've got there now. So this should be a window for them to experiment a little bit and find a couple more players. In Australia, I mean, they may do something spectacular against Italy today. We're recording as that match is on, but there's nothing over the last 12 months to suggest to me that you necessarily have to go full out against Australia. But the contrast to that is the fact that the team needs to find confidence and needs to be in good form and rhythm before they play South Africa a week later, before they hit the Six Nations. So there's a big push and pull for Andy Farrell in that selection stuff.
Yeah, I think it'll be harder to... I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's harder to do that when you get such a flat performance like that. That's what I mean. That
it's one of the flattest I've been at.
If guys had really stuck their hand up and more convincing throughout the course of the 80 minutes, then I think we'd be sitting here having a different conversation. But I'm fully expecting Andy Farrell. I think we could nearly pick the Ireland team for next week now, and I think part of that will be a message to guys who he'll just say, I gave you the opportunity, you didn't quite take it against, a weaker opposition. So
he himself seemed confused, didn't he, Andy Farrell, when you asked him about it afterwards?
Supporters, you can be guaranteed when the team gets named next Thursday will be given out that it's the same old. But if guys aren't taking their opportunities against lesser teams, it's very hard for Andy Farrell to stand by and not go back to the guys who have delivered him in the past. Now, whether that's the right path to take in terms of the bigger picture and what's to come, I would have my doubts, but I just don't see a load of guys from the provinces banging down the door. I'm not talking about who played today, but guys outside the squad. I don't see a huge amount of guys, one or two exceptions, absolutely, but there aren't loads of players out there who were kind of sticking their hand up and making the case. So in some elements, his hands are tied, I think. Yeah.
What about Tom Farrell? Were you out there when he came into the mix-up?
Yeah. I mean, it was...
They had a presentation.
It's an incredible story. He's to go up now and sing a song. He's I thought he did well. I wouldn't overstate it. I thought he was part of a patchy performance, and he had patchy moments, but I thought he grew into it. He became more comfortable, and I certainly wouldn't write off his chances of playing for Ireland again based on what I saw. Do I think he did enough to unseat Gary Ringrose going into next week? No. Could he potentially build on what he's done here and come back and offer something different to Ireland in that number 13 jersey? Certainly there was moments where his creativity shone through, where he freed his hands and he released those outside him, and it's very difficult for a guy coming in to make his debut at the age of 32 and all the emotion of that to go out there and make a statement performance. The clunkiness, I keep saying that word, the clunkiness of the performance makes it hard for someone like that to come in and impress. He's obviously going to be, he's never played at this level before, and Japan played fast and hard, and apparently the tempo of the game was really, they felt really relentless down there. So really all he's trying to do is get through it and survive and show a little bit of what he can do. You know, it often takes, I talk to people who say it takes 10 caps to feel comfortable at international level. He doesn't have that luxury, but I don't think he let himself down in any way. But he didn't, you know, I don't think he forced his way into the team next week. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I did shake my head in the first half, Sinead, back to a point that we were chatting about in the video yesterday, when he ran a line and Jacob Stockdale went off on a switch line and the ball went to deck. And I'm kind of thinking, if he was in the squad in the summer when he deserved to be, Jacob Stockdale was also in the squad.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily his fault. It was just two guys who haven't played together. And I'm thinking, what a missed opportunity it was in the summer. Like you said, Rud, he doesn't have 10 caps, but he certainly could have had one coming into this game, which I think, you know, that would have been a big help as well, because he would have had a couple of weeks or 2 to 3 weeks of training with the squad as well. I know a lot of the guys were away with the Lions, and I'm like a broken record banging on about this, but it smacks of a lack of continuity. And I wanted to actually, in that regard, go back to Jimmy O'Brien, because look, obviously Jamie Osborne's going to be out next weekend. I wouldn't be convinced by Jacob Stockdale at fullback, I have to admit. You mentioned Matt Hansen. I think it'd be a big ask, number one, to put him in with such little game time, and he hasn't played fullback either. So in my mind,
I think Jimmy O'Brien's a good call.
But Jimmy O'Brien wasn't in the squad, the initial squad. He started both games against Georgia and Portugal at fullback, did well. I know he wasn't at his best in the early part of the season for Leinster in South Africa, but if he's going to be starting against Australia next weekend, again, you're kind of just wondering the lack of planning. And
Ireland are paying the price for the Lions.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely, and it's not just the fatigue and all that sort of stuff. It's the fact that the head coach's focus was and most of the coaching team's focus was elsewhere for a big chunk of the World Cup cycle, and that's the decision that the RFU made and that Andy Farrell has made, and he sold it as that he would go off and become a better coach, and that the players, and he picked a lot of them, would go off to Australia and become better players for the experience, and that by picking 16 of them in the end, wasn't it, that the others below, maybe it was 18 months, Osborne and Clarkson went over, but the others would get a chance in Portugal and Georgia. But the Portugal game was a waste of time, and the tour itself always felt like it was a bit of an afterthought, even though Paul O'Connell, I'm sure, did everything he could to make it a really good experience for those players. And look at what England are doing right now. They went to Argentina, like they're rewarding the players who went to Argentina, who played well over there. They look like they've been more strategically aligned for the last year, and they didn't have a dual focus. And look, maybe Andy Farrell, a skill coach that he is, can pull this all together in time for a World Cup in 2 years, and there is a lot of time to figure this out. But I think there's going to be more pain along the way, and I'm not 100% convinced that they're going to be able to do it, because I think they're not finding enough new blood, and they're not finding a new way of playing that suits the players. I think the big, and we talked about it last week, Keane, and we need to put a moratorium on Johnny Sexton mentions. The standards have dropped across the board. It's not on the out halves, but the standard of execution drops. It used to happen when he wasn't able to train. Now he's a coach, he can't train with them. The whole level has dropped in terms of what they do since, and it's happened slowly and surely, but right now it looks like they're bottoming out in terms of that process of losing Sexton and all the things that he brought. It wasn't just playing it out half, it was all the stuff he brought across the board, and they need to find someone else who's able to drive that. They need to find their standards again and lift the standards. It can't just come from one player. It's not going to be a 25-year-old or a 22-year-old starting in the number 10 shirt. It has to be across the board, because right now they're making way too many errors. They're not fixing the things that need to be fixed. And at some stage it got exposed against New Zealand in the last 20 minutes last week. A New Zealand team that didn't play well for an hour. It got massively exposed by France here a couple of months ago, and whatever about Australia come to town next week, who have very good players, they need to get it right in 2 weeks' time against South Africa, or else that could get very ugly.
That is all really worrying.
I think they're caught between two stools, and it goes back to the point that you just made there, Rod, in terms of Andy Farrell not being around for the majority of this year. The game has moved on in terms of the contestables, but it doesn't necessarily suit the strengths of this Ireland team, and you can see at times that they're trying to play a bit of it, but Crowley's kicking quite isn't on the money, the chasing isn't quite on the money, and it should be something that you'd imagine with the GAA background, which Johnny Sexton touched on during the week, that they would be good at. But we're still seeing them get into their shape, but the shape is far less convincing. And I think a lot of people are still waiting to see Andrew Goodman's influence on this. And I know Andy Farrell runs the overall attack, and it's very hard to launch strike moves off a faltering line out. But I think a lot of Leinster fans were unconvinced by Andrew Goodman's attack when he was with Leinster, and we just haven't really seen enough of it at all. So while the game is moving forward, and you can see South Africa have adapted, you can see how well England have adapted, Ireland, to me, it looks like, are kind of wondering, is this the way we should go, or should we double down on what we have been doing? But it kind of reminds me a bit of like 2019 in terms of the World Cup. If they don't evolve, they've already been caught out against New Zealand and the likes, but in terms of what's coming over the next 2 years, and that clunkiness, to use your word, to use Andy Farrell's word, to me speaks of like being caught between two minds in terms of how we want to play, what team we want to be. So it's not great to be in, but there is time to turn it around.
Yeah, what about that identity thing? Because I think, and Farrell mentioned that, like that they, what they want to stand for and all the rest, but it's quite hard to see what that is at the moment.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of that 2020-21 period when they lost their way a little bit and they got spooked in Paris and the game got away from them. And Andy Farrell went and got Gary Keegan in from the outside. He went and got Mick Carney back. Paul O'Connell came in a little bit later than that. So he's made changes in that time. I think he'll obviously give it the full window and see what the next two games bring. Doesn't sound like he sounds like he has full faith in his coaching ticket and his coaching staff, and he thought they were good enough, most of them, to bring them on the lines, and he tried to bring O'Connell on the line, so it's not like he was relegated. It was O'Connell's choice not to bring it. So I don't see where he goes and makes those changes behind the scenes, and he doesn't seem to want to change the squad, so he needs to make the changes himself in terms of, I'm not saying he needs to remove himself from the equation, I'm saying he needs to make the changes to the way the team is playing. I mean, there were times last year, Keane, when Goodman's attack was the only thing Ireland had going for it. Like their set piece attack got them out of scrapes a load of times last season, but the set piece is such an issue that it's hard to launch anything, as you say. So they're not in a good place. They haven't fallen that far. Like they're still a good enough team to put. We're complaining an awful lot for a country that just won 6 tries to 1, but I think everyone understands that we're holding them to their own standards because we know how good this team has been under this coaching ticket, and they are currently ranked 3rd in the world, and they aspire to be one of the top 2 or 3 teams, and the top 2 or 3 teams put Japan to bed far more comfortably and impose themselves on Japan far better than they did today. And I think when they go up against better teams in the next 2 weeks, if they play the way they're playing at the moment and they don't find solutions, which is hard to do in 7 days, it's going to be really difficult to get wins. And it's not going to knock them out of the World Cup the top seeding, but it will knock their momentum going into a Six Nations, and they look like a team. Everyone thinks they're a team on the slide. Everyone from the outside is selling their Ireland stock. They need to give fans, pundits themselves, a reason to believe in this project.
Oh, listen, Australia won't fear coming here next weekend.
Yeah, and I think it's worth touching on the defence as well, which at times last weekend, now it was mainly down to Gary Ringrose. I was kind of wondering, have Ireland actually moved to a blitz defence here, because he was shooting so hard off the line like he does for Leinster, and we know, like under Simon Easterby, the defence isn't quite as aggressive as what Shaq Neenar were play at Leinster. And just like the way Japan were sort of cutting them open, I know they kind of lacked the finishing or the final pass at times, but Andy Farrell pointedly said that there was times where our defence was our best thing, but we lacked like collision winning, we lacked punch in that. And if you go back to the DNA question, Sinead, in terms of what does this team stand for, I think that is a starting point for any Andy Farrell team, even when he was defence coach with Ireland, with England, is that like your collision winning. And again, against a team like Japan, who, and I remarked to you, Rod, during the lineup, that they were quite a small team, apart from their captain in the second row, who is a very good player, Kiwi. They're not the biggest team, they're not the strongest team. Yeah, good punch, but they pack a punch for their size, and you're kind of looking at Ireland wondering why they're not doing the same. So I think all aspects of their game, I don't think it's just the attack, but I think the defence as well is still maybe trying to figure it out as well, because obviously Simon Easterby was away on the lines and he was the head coach during the Six Nations, and I know he was still doing defence, but it's hard to kind of do both, you know what I mean? So a lot of areas to fix, and I'm certainly not pressing the panic button just yet, but you'd really want to be seeing significant improvements, especially next week, because if they have a limp performance again next week, I'd be very fearful of what the Box will do here at the end of the month. So it's a nice little run in, having Australia. Joe Schmidt will have them fired up before, which is like, it's the ultimate test, isn't it, at the moment, of where this Ireland team stand by facing the Springboks in a couple of weeks. Okay, anything else before we go?
No.
We all go with that? Yes, time to go. Okay. Keane, Murray, thanks a million for that. Well, we will be here after the Australia game next weekend, but that's it for now. Thanks for tuning in.